Over the past 12 years, many companies receive funding relatively easily. Will this still be the case during the COVID-19 lockdown and the following recession? And will this result in a Darwinistic situation where only the fittest companies will survive? You're watching or listening to Business Podcast Groningen. My name is Micha Busch. And today I'm talking about this topic with Bill Reichert, entrepreneur, venture capitalist, author and mentor, lecturer at the University of California, and managing director and co-founder of Garage Technology Ventures. Bill, welcome to the show and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Misha. I'm delighted to be here. Happy to be talking with you.
Great. How are things for you right now regarding the COVID-19 crisis and what has changed in the way you do business at the moment?
So, like pretty much everybody else around the world, we have been driven to overwhelmingly conducting our meetings via video conference as opposed to in person. And that has had a very interesting effect on the way we're doing business. And interestingly enough, in our world, which is the world of, what you would call knowledge workers, sort of professional knowledge workers, we don't actually sort of make anything. We don't actually operate anything. So it's a very, the world, it's all about, conversations and communications. Yeah. What we've found is that, interestingly, that this has probably improved productivity. So yes. It's a very sort of bizarre effect in the sense that, we're not scheduling coffees or scheduling lunches or scheduling dinners, and we're not traveling through traffic to meetings. And interestingly, it has flattened the world of entrepreneurship. And so, on any given day, I started this morning talking to Israel, to a company in Israel, and I ended last night talking to a company in Singapore, and, and sort of everything in between, including Washington, DC, and Boston, and Chicago, and even some companies here in Silicon Valley.
Right.
And so, the amazing thing is that it has narrowed the gap between companies that are here in Silicon Valley and companies that are anywhere else in the world. Because when I talk to somebody in San Francisco, it's really no different than when I'm talking to somebody in Israel.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting, and it'll be interesting to see if that in fact plays out in terms of the way the venture ecosystem flattens their bias, which is traditionally, you want to invest in companies that are in the neighborhood, right?
Right.
And now that you can't meet with them anyway, doesn't make that much difference. Do we really think it makes that much difference?
Yeah.
So we'll see. And so that's, for us in this strange world, in terms of our portfolio companies, pretty consistently, everybody is seeing at a minimum a slowing in the speed at which they can do business. So this COVID thing has certainly thrown sand in the gears of getting things done, where you have to initiate a relationship, in a sales and marketing sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The processes have slowed down, and in particular, if you're talking about physical goods, we're working with a company. They've got a technology that includes some hardware, and it's just been very hard for them to send a sales engineer out with the hardware to go to a client to, sit in a manufacturing setting and demonstrate the technology. So, right. So it's slowed those sorts of things down.
So that's the flip side of you being able to do meetings much more effective. Actually, when it comes to the more physical demonstrations, it's actually the opposite. effect.
Yeah, it's definitely slowed that down. But then, excuse me, there is a very interesting. It's unlike the the meltdown 10 years ago, or the global financial crisis, depending on what you call it. This is affecting different companies very, very differently, right? So
Yes.
we're seeing a bunch of companies at one end of the spectrum that are actually getting a boost from this crisis, and so almost in many cases that's a temporary boost. One of the examples is in logistics. So we've got a couple of companies in our portfolio that are logistics companies, and they're going nuts, right?
Right. Right.
Because there's been this phenomenon because of COVID. You've had a lot more delivery-oriented stuff,
Yes.
and you've also had this somewhat bizarre phenomenon that all the toilet paper in all of the warehouses around the world is being moved from warehouses into closets
Yeah.
in garages, right?
It's crazy.
And so examples like that.
And are you specifically investing in those type of short-term opportunities, like looking for companies in the
Toilet paper logistics, right?
not the toilet paper, but like
No, no,
logistical
no.
software, for example?
No, I mean our reality is that the way that the investment process goes in venture capital uh, is it's somewhat rarely sort of opportunistic at the weekly level, right?
Right.
So we have broad theses and mandates in terms of domains in which we're investing, and what has happened in this crisis is, God bless entrepreneurs. What has happened is almost any company, any startup company that can create some sense of advantage from COVID, has started pitching us on how our AI algorithms will help discover drugs that will cure COVID, or
Right.
our medical technology that will help develop tests that will test for COVID. So there's been this explosion of business plans and pitch decks that are sort of COVID oriented,
Yeah.
which again, I guess I understand why it's happening, but what the entrepreneurs don't appreciate is now when a COVID pitch comes in, we're just going, oh, not another COVID pitch,
Another
right?
one of those.
And so because it is, it's a hugely significant event. It's not clearly cases a long-term fundable venture investment thesis.
Right.
And so if you're an entrepreneur and you think you can gain some advantage from what's going on now, just be careful that that from a venture point of view, it's going to be hard for venture investors to jump on those opportunities, or on your opportunity, because we're actually getting overwhelmed by
Right.
entrepreneurs who are pitching all these opportunities. If you have an opportunity in your customer base, so if you can deliver something tomorrow that your customers will buy that is related to this interim crisis, then that's fine. And we have those discussions with portfolio companies,
Yeah.
about the importance of being agile and nimble and being able to deliver value that customers need, right?
Right.
So, but it doesn't make it a venture fundable thesis over the long term. It just is a potentially very good survival strategy given the dynamics of how the world has evolved.
Yeah. And what would be the time frame that would make it a particularly interesting venture for you to say these are solutions, technical solutions, software solutions that do solve a problem, maybe more related to the world that we will see after COVID? What would be a time frame that would make it interesting for you?
Yeah. So clearly, sort of the world after COVID, one of the domains I mentioned is the whole domain of logistics. So in the world of logistics is it is increasingly digital, but it is still relatively primitive.
Mhm.
And so what we can confidently predict is going to happen with this crisis is that everybody is going to be looking at their supply chains and trying to figure out, is it not just is it the most efficient that it can be? Is there a way we can drive more efficiency into our supply chain so that our order quantities and our time frames and our costs and our paperwork and all that can be improved. The other thing that's going to happen is people are going to be more focused on, at a minimum, second sourcing. What they're going to be looking at is this issue of resilience, right? Is my supply chain resilient? Where are the potential risks to my supply chain? Where are there sort of excessive dependencies that require that I have, I don't depend on one factory in China. Maybe I have a factory in China and one in Vietnam and one in Sri Lanka. I don't know, or whatever.
Right.
Or one in Mexico or one in Slovakia, right? So there's going to be a whole bunch of work around the supply chain, which includes both planning as well as logistics associated with it. And that means things like making sure everything in your supply chain is instrumented and that you have the most current data on where everything is, so that as soon as an event occurs, that a typhoon in Southeast Asia that is going to disrupt your supply of memory chips, whatever, right? I mean, so you're going to want to be able to have the potential for alternative supplies and be able to be responsive, so that you can be faster than anyone else, or at least not slower than anyone else, at making sure that your supply chain remains resilient. So that's a massive part of the global economy, right? And involves a whole bunch of prosaic stuff, like the whole brokerage and bill of lading and port, the processes that go on at ports. I got to admit, I had a just eye-opening meeting with a team of executives from Maersk. So Maersk, the shipping company,
right? Yes.
And we don't pay that much attention to things like container ships, right? I mean, we sort of assume that they're going to, and so Maersk, great, wonderful, huge, historically successful company. And I met with them and I asked them to give me sort of their thesis on technological innovation and digitization and all that sort of thing. And they led off by saying, we're Maersk, we are the lifeblood of global commerce. And some huge percentage of the global economy, is dependent upon Maersk. in terms of, what they ship around the world, and you go, oh my God, right? I mean, we techies in our little tech hubs, sort of dismiss that part of the world as being, yeah, that's the legacy,
Yeah,
boring,
not interesting.
part of the world. But it is ripe for innovation and opportunity, and for new technologies
Yeah,
to make to make things more efficient and to make them more resilient. And so I
right,
think we're these crises wake us up to those opportunities.
right. Do you think it takes a special type of entrepreneur to identify those, well, let's say less sexy opportunities in fields such as shipping and global distribution?
Well, it's a special type of entrepreneur. I mean, I don't think it's a DNA thing. I think um, it is a mindset thing, in the sense that you have to, it's a combination of mindset and experience. You have to have the open mindset that is constantly curious about, how can we make this a better world? And, considering, and has this awareness that what affects our experience of life in the world includes a whole bunch of boring, prosaic things,
Yeah,
as well as, sort of the exciting gadget stuff, right? Our smartphone, right? Um, and so, but you need to have had that exposure to the fact that these, big, ugly, rusting container ships, and I don't mean to cast aspersions on container, are core to our experience, on a day-to-day basis,
yeah,
and we ignore them. But when I mean, so we've been pitched by. I mean, it's sort of crazy, but it goes back to when you were a kid playing with blocks, um, and or Legos or Connects or whatever you were playing with. Um, you're at a port, handling container ships. You've got these container ships with thousands of containers coming off the container ship, and what you want to do is you want to pick them up and put them down as fast as you can, because the guy in the crane who's picking them up and putting them down is paid a lot of money,
right,
and sitting there at the dock, you're burning a lot of money taking up that dock space, and so you're trying to pick them up, and but exactly, how do you figure out where to put each container? So it turns out, there's an immense amount of mathematics involved in optimizing where you put each container, because each container is only going to go on one truck,
yeah,
and that truck has a destination. And so mapping each container to the truck and its destination, and optimizing blah blah blah, there's just a lot of math involved, potentially, that can create a ton of value. You can get that implemented in place.
right,
So it's just extraordinarily exciting to see how many corners of our life are open to the possibility of improvement through technology.
right.
And so I'm getting kind of worked up about
Yeah, yeah.
about container ships.
No, but it's
It's
a
kind of
very
crazy, but
interesting example. But
yeah.
how would you suggest startups and entrepreneurs to explore these opportunities? Because I guess also the container space, it's something you need to really get into to really identify the opportunities, understand the processes,
Right.
and perhaps for the average entrepreneur, he's looking at different spaces and sectors. What would you suggest to somebody to, as a maybe a framework to explore these type of opportunities?
Yeah, so we have come across entrepreneurs who have approached sort of opportunity analysis in a sort of systematic way. A couple of entrepreneurs who they met at Google, and they decided they wanted to start their own company, and they spent a bunch of time in front of whiteboards, sort of thinking through sort of, all the pieces of the world that possibly some, combination of digitization and maybe novel device or product and maybe, application, blah, 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 right? And so
That's
we've
a big
seen
job.
that. It's rare. I mean, there are not a lot of examples of companies that happen that way, right? If you think about the entrepreneur journey. So one of my colleagues at Berkeley, talks about the different entrepreneur journeys, and usually, and my own personal experience, I started my first company when I was a graduate student at Stanford, pretty much by accident. I did not go to Stanford to become an entrepreneur. I had very different thoughts. But I happened to be doing a project with a venture guy and a buddy of mine. And while we were doing this project, we identified this sort of gap in the world, this white space. And I made this casual comment about, somebody should fix this. And the VC overheard me saying that, and he said, "Why don't you do it, Bill?" I said, "No, I'm doing other stuff." And he said, "No, why not?"
Yeah.
And so that's how I became an entrepreneur. It was, I had no intention, but it was sort of, and arguably I did not have an open mind, right? Arguably I had a closed mind.
Yeah.
And it was the VC, somewhat ironically, I don't know. It was the VC who opened my mind and said, "No, Bill, you should go do this." So there is, usually it's this mindset and skill set meets or bumps into an opportunity and sees it as such, and and that's how things happen, right? Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg, so when I went to Harvard, every freshman at Harvard gets a physical book called The Facebook of all of your classmates, right? And so it's when I went, obviously it was a long time ago, right? So we all got, when we got to school, we all got this, we all got the Facebook. And so time passes, the internet, it becomes the World Wide Web. It's stunning that it took until 2004 before they digitized the Facebook. But basically, Zuckerberg said, "Hey, why don't we turn this into a dynamic space rather than just a brochure?"
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so it was almost obvious. He certainly they didn't invent a social network, right? There were social networks long before Facebook.
Yeah.
But it was sort of this combination of mindset, skill set, they could code, and opportunity, and making it happen.
Right.
The other side of it is, the other entrepreneur journey is the the team that has discovered what's the Cisco example, right, where the team actually creates a new product to solve a problem, and then based on that launches a company, as opposed to seeing an opportunity and building a company. So but it's interesting how that's relatively few successful companies have actually come from, if you think about it.
That's very
So
interesting.
you think about all of the successful companies in Silicon Valley. Can you name? I gave it away with the Cisco example, but can you name another successful company in Silicon Valley whose success is based upon a product or technology that they invented?
Right. It's jumping on existing technology or infrastructure usually. And
Right.
and
It's
how is it
really hard. I
how is it
mean,
for you right now? Like you, not as an entrepreneur necessarily, but as
yeah.
from within your company as a venture capitalist, when you look at businesses to potentially partner up with, do you have some kind of framework where you identify market opportunities and what it's going towards, and then look, okay, I want certain companies that fit with those opportunities that I have already identified?
Um, okay. So, dirty little secret. Don't tell anybody.
Right.
um, Pretty much every VC, claims to have some sort of investment thesis, because the only way you can raise money from limited partners is to have an investment thesis.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you can't go to institutions and say, can you commit $10 to my fund? And they say, well, tell me, what are you going to invest in? And you can't say, well, if it looks good, maybe we'll invest in, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You can't say that, right? You've
Yeah.
got to have an investment thesis, right? So generally, investment thesis is around some, set of domains that are either market sectors or technologies. And so, we have, so with I don't know if you mentioned or saw that, in addition to Garage Technology Ventures, we are affiliated with a global fund called Pegasus Tech Ventures. So I'm a partner at Pegasus Tech Ventures, which is a sort of big global fund.
Mhm.
And the Pegasus model is to work with their LPs to identify sectors where the LPs can add value to the portfolio companies.
Yeah.
And so we spend time with the LPs saying, what sectors do you think are going to be important to you over a horizon? So every corporation has got to do this work of having, some point of view about sort of critical strategic sectors and technologies. So we take that work and we, within Pegasus, we say, okay, let's use this as a filter for identifying companies that are interesting. Having said that, these frameworks are almost always, relatively general.
Yeah.
So 5G is probably important. IoT seems to be important.
Yeah.
AI, obviously that's important. Robotics, those are relevant. Autonomy, it's a type of AI. Smart cities, that's a IoT meets AI, whatever. So there's all of these sort of frameworks of domains, of markets and market sectors and technologies, but you can't. I mean, and so we use those as filters. If somebody comes in with, an app to help Zoomers figure out where they want to go for drinks after work, okay, fine. That's not gonna fit our filter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But you want to keep it a bit broad so that you don't miss out on opportunities, or
right, and so it's it's just, it's impossible to stay on top of all the emerging technologies that are out there, to have a very specific target list, and then within a sector target list, you've got all the diversity associated with the team of entrepreneurs that are going after it.
Yeah.
So we have, sort of these filters that help us focus, but it's the business of actually looking at a company and then deciding whether to invest in it. Pretty much all of that other stuff, once you get to that level, the other stuff is thrown out, and you're in an entirely different domain of doing an analysis of a company.
Right.
And so, I have tried to sort of consistently remain open-minded about opportunities, and avoid, one of the things that I see happening, I see it with me, I see it with my colleagues, I see it in the world. We all have developed this coping mechanism for dealing with uncertainty and change. And that coping mechanism is to have certain fixed points of view, which sometimes can be referred to as biases, about the way the world, should be, is, could be, and the way other people should behave, right?
Yeah.
What's the right thing to do, right? So we've created all of these structures in the way we see the world that makes it easier to cope. Because if you had to revisit all of your beliefs sort of every time you made a decision, you could never make a decision. Mm-hmm. So, it's a very, very functional way to design the brain. But it has the tendency to cause you to dismiss things out of hand that, may be novel in a way that is going to be a paradigm shift. And so this is the classic problem with innovation, is that there is almost no innovation that people come up with that bunches and bunches of people don't say, oh yeah, we could do that, or oh, we tried that before, oh yeah, that's never going to work, right? I mean, that's the way the human brain is constructed. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge for entrepreneurs is to be able to come up with a framing of their innovation that preempts these natural biases that humans automatically have, believe it or not, even though we're in Silicon Valley and even though we're in the business of innovation, every human being has these natural biases that work against novelty and innovation, because we have to, right? So as an entrepreneur, you've got to figure out, how can I frame this innovation to overcome those natural biases? And so, we are, an example we're working on right now is a company that has, I'm not sure if I want to talk about, right. Okay, let me frame it. Okay, a company has a novel way of screening for breast cancer. And so it turns out that this novel way of screening for breast cancer takes advantage of some technologies that have been known for several years, and have been tried in different ways before. But this company is putting together this combination of technologies that has not been put together before. And so there's, the challenge that they've got is because, doctors, physicians are way up there in terms of, as smart as they may be or whatever. Doctors, again, out of necessity, have these frameworks in their head as to what works and what doesn't work, what's worth spending time on, what's not worth spending. And so there tends to be this natural resistance to new approaches, believe it or not. I mean, there's a natural resistance to new approaches. And these guys have got to figure out how to get above it. Now, it's turned out it has taken them years of peer-reviewed paper and clinical studies and trials to break through this bias. And it's an extraordinary story. And I think it could be, disruptive to the entire, breast cancer screening, industry. And we'll see. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, and so on the one hand, it's very exciting to see the results of this work and its potential for, saving lives.
Yeah.
And, that's very exciting. On the other hand, as an investor, we've got to take into account that there's a lot of sand in the gears that makes it hard for something that may be truly valuable and truly innovative to get through the system.
Right.
So that's, it's real work that takes real time and real money. And so our challenge as investors is, we want to see this future that this company is painting with this novel technology. But are we confident that we can get a syndicate of investors around the table that have enough money, enough patience, enough time to help this team break through all the things they've got to break through in order for them to become a standard of care?
Yeah.
So that's independent of an investment thesis of, sort of predicting the future. It's the nitty gritty of what it takes to launch and scale a company.
Yeah. That's a super interesting point. And I guess that very much connects to what you said earlier about not investing in short-term opportunities, but looking at something that can add value long-term. You talked about the necessity of having to focus on certain areas, and at the same time, of course, staying open-minded for something outside of there, or keeping it not too specific. One of the sectors you focus on is clean technology. And a lot of countries right now are talking about but that the COVID crisis might be a moment to accelerate change with regards to environmental issues. For example, a big part of the EU recovery funds need to be focused on the European Green Deal. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think these kind of disruptive times that we see right now can create major technological breakthroughs with regards to clean tech?
Well, I don't think the disruption is going to drive breakthroughs. I think the disruption could drive some infrastructure investment that will drive adoption of some of these technologies.
Right.
And so there is a lot of hope that the application of bailout funds, right? So we're going to have to run these massive fiscal deficits over this period of time in order to keep the wheels of commerce moving. And so how those massive fiscal deficits get deployed is going to be a huge issue. I think that the evidence shows that after the global financial crisis, that the application of funds toward renewables more than paid for itself. That there were a bunch of programs in the United States. I don't know as much about Europe in terms of what the analysis was, but there was a sizable program here in the United States called the ARPA-E fund, um, and all of the data suggests that was money well spent.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike it's a wholly different thing, but unlike giving everybody a check, to keep them afloat, having some targeted funding for promising commercial the developments, it seems like it can work. So you may or may not appreciate, in the United States, there's still a strong skepticism toward what is broadly referred to as industrial policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we sort of accuse the Europeans of being much more socialistic and much more sort of focused on trying to do industrial policy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole different debate. But we all do it. It's just a matter of degree. The United States has a massive industrial policy program, which we don't call industrial policy, but it's our defense budget, right? Yeah. I mean, yeah. And that swamps anything the Europeans have ever done, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but we hesitate when it comes to anything that suggests that the federal government should try to pick winners at the commercial level. Having said that, there are a whole bunch of emerging technologies that now have emerged that are now clearly commercially viable in the renewable energy space. And then there are some that have not yet become commercially viable, but are on the cusp. So, storage is still not very economic, but we're getting there. And then there's a whole bunch of other sort of sustainable, renewable. There's a whole bunch of other sectors outside of what is generally thought of as clean tech. When we talk about clean tech, we largely think about things like solar energy and wind energy and sort of other sources of energy that are not fossil fuels, hence the term clean tech. But in a much broader sort of material science, sustainability, sort of economic viability sense, there are a whole bunch of very interesting technologies that have come out of that industry that have, very, very interesting, economic applications that I don't think are going to be necessarily driven by the crisis, but it certainly makes sense. So a lot of the, sort of clean tech bleeds into smart cities, mm-hmm. right? Because, the idea of smart cities, one of the ideas of smart cities and then smart buildings is to be more efficient. And one of the values of being more efficient is that you use less energy. And if you use less energy, you reduce carbon and all that sort of stuff. So clean tech has blended into a whole bunch of other sectors beyond energy production. And so to the extent that we can instrument our cities and our buildings to be more efficient, then you're going to save money over the long term, right? So it's the type of investment that pays dividends, as opposed again to just simply giving away money. So so what I'm hoping, to your question, what I'm hoping is that we all of our governments figure out ways to, in a as efficient as possible approach, allocate some of this deficit spending toward investing in technologies, in infrastructure, in instrumenting our world so that we can operate more efficiently in the future and then save money and recover those investments over time.
Right.
So that was a very sort of broad, generic way of answering your question. I don't know, I mean, the problem is when you start calculating sort of jobs created, politicians focus on jobs created, and that makes sense. I understand why they do that.
Yeah.
But it's just so hard. It's you can create a lot more jobs digging ditches than you can instrumenting your city.
Yeah.
And so if jobs created is your metric of success, you're not going to put the money in the best place. And so,
exactly.
we need some balance between the politics of deficit spending, and the economics of deficit spending to get us to put our money into projects that are going to make the most sense over the long term.
Right. What are one or two examples of projects that you see potentially, or that you are looking into finding startups and entrepreneurs that potentially can solve some of the biggest environmental challenges that we are seeing right now, or that we're expecting over the coming decades?
Yeah, that's interesting. So the I would say in a broad brush, well, it happens. Yeah. So this is the mind of the mind of a VC. The mind of a VC works in a sort of quadratic sort of way, which is to say our brain, my brain is currently filled with the projects that we're working on now. So there are, we have a short list of roughly six companies that we're investigating, and then a next tier of another 12 companies. So I've got 18 companies in my brain at any one time. and so then there's this incredible decay, right? So outside of what's on my short list, the second tier list, it would be really hard without going back to my notes to name the next 12. And then it would be almost impossible to name all the other companies that are sort of in our broader pipeline. So it happens that one of the shortlist ones is a company that it turns out that nobody has figured out how to recycle lithium batteries. Who knew, right? I mean,
yeah.
So and so you can recover a little bit, here and there, but basically the way lithium-ion batteries have been treated, they're a relatively new and they're a relatively small percentage of all the batteries used. So just by bulk, that's an interesting question. I should find out. But by bulk, we're using more lead acid batteries still than we are using lithium-ion batteries. But that's going to, because again, 98% of all the cars on the planet are internal combustion and not electric, right?
Right.
So, I mean, but pretty soon the bulk of lithium-ion batteries is going to be significant, and the materials used in them, which obviously includes lithium, but also cobalt and also nickel, which are not cheap. And are not getting cheaper, and are expensive and messy to mine. And so this is not going to change the planet. It's not going to save us from climate change or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But it's a really, really interesting commercial opportunity in this sector that is exploding. So the use of lithium-ion batteries is exploding, and really high confidence in those projections. And so a second order effect question is, is there an opportunity in the recycling of those batteries? And so there are a few companies out there that have come up with, after a lot of hard work and research, have come up with some novel technologies for recycling those batteries. And, that in some number of years, that could be a huge business. depending upon who captures that business.
Yeah.
So that's, over the years we have invested in solar, in material science, in hydrogen, in fuel cells, in water. So these are sort of big topics, but the reality for us is that in most cases, our company is not going to change the world in the same way that you could argue, Facebook had a global impact, Google's had a global impact, Twitter even has had a global impact, but it's really hard for a clean tech company to have a global impact. But it's easy to see how they can be a highly successful investment.
Right. And altogether they form parts of a big puzzle, right? That do make those big changes possible.
Right. So obviously the electrification of transportation, Tesla has a lot of visibility in that domain.
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme of things, it will be it'll be a big player, but it won't be the company that makes the entire difference.
Yeah. Right. Right.
It is one of my big, it's one of my big regrets in life that I had the opportunity to invest in Tesla way back when.
Yeah.
And I thought it was an insane I thought it was incredibly cool, but I thought it was insane as an investment. And so I had this conversation with a fellow VC friend of mine, and we were debating. Tesla was one of these companies we were both looking at, and we were debating it as an investment. And she was saying, well, Bill, all they have to do is sell 2,000 cars, and they will be profitable.
Yeah.
And I go, Nancy, that's not the way it's going to work. That's not how it's going to play out, right? It's, there are going to be all sorts of hiccups. It's going to take much longer. It's going to be way more expensive. And she said, oh, I think it's a great investment opportunity. I said, okay, good luck. So
she got in.
She invested, and I didn't. And the fact of the matter was, I was absolutely right. That the check, if I had written a check for that round. So this is before Elon Musk.
All right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So actually, Elon Musk was an investor. He was a co-investor in this round, but it was the original founding team. And again.
And what made the eventual difference then?
Well, what made the difference was Elon Musk.
Right.
So Tesla, went bankrupt, essentially almost went bankrupt 3 times. So it did turn out that had I written the check for that round, and then if I had sold at the IPO, I would have lost money.
Right.
Now, if I had not sold at the IPO, okay, life would be different.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine we can fill a whole interview with opportunities that you jumped in on and it did become successful also.
Thank you. Yes, of course. Right. So,
but I can, I can't really imagine, but kind of how that must feel for you, like looking back.
Right. There are plenty of those that go both ways.
Yes.
But my wife has not forgiven me, but I've somehow managed to cope. So how are we doing?
We're getting. I have a final question for you. If you have one tip to give to tech entrepreneurs that are trying to start a new venture during times like these, what would it be? For
it's true whether or not we're going through a COVID crisis, but it's especially true right now. The tip that I share with all entrepreneurs is, it seems obvious, but it's extremely rare. You have got to figure out a way to stand out. Mm-hmm. And so this is a workshop I do called Getting to Wow. And the whole point is that as an industry, we do a terrible job of coaching entrepreneurs on how to pitch. And mainly what we do is we coach them on constructing a logical argument that sort of lays out sort of all of the elements of a business that can succeed. And yes, you have got to have that. But just because you have high confidence that you have the logic down for how to build a company that will succeed doesn't mean that you're going to get the attention of investors or of even customers. What you've got to figure out is how to get the investor to say, wow, that's amazing. Really? You can do that? Or to get the customer to say, wow, right? Yeah. I've never seen anything like that before. You've got to figure out, what is your wow? What is your wow? It's not good enough to be a better, storage device, or even a faster chip, or even a more efficient database, or a easier to use application. You've got to create the experience that you are, sort of 10 times better. That what you have is something amazing and incredible. Right. So, and generally and almost always, that is associated with having a compelling value proposition. And way too little time is spent by entrepreneurs and pitch coaches focusing on what is the compelling value proposition. I mean, they talk about problems and solutions and team and technology and IP and go-to-market strategy and financials. But the only thing that matters in being a successful company is that you have a compelling value proposition. I shouldn't say it's not the only thing, but it is the necessary thing.
Yeah.
In order to succeed, you have to have a compelling value proposition. And then you have to do everything else well, right? But it doesn't work well and you don't have a compelling value proposition.
Right.
You're never going to break through because there's so much noise out there. And so entrepreneurs assume that the world is a meritocracy, that we investors will gravitate toward the best ideas. And, the reality is there's just so much noise out there. It's hard for us to find the best ideas.
Especially right now.
Right. And so unless you can really stand out, unless you can really in a 20-second, literally, I'm serious, 20-second package, you've got to get the investor to say, wow, I got to track these guys down. It can't be buried in a 56 slide deck, right? I mean, it's got to be 20 seconds. Wow. And so that's my advice to entrepreneurs. You've got to find your wow. Yeah. And you've got to lead with your wow. Every time you talk about your company, it's got to be, in 20 seconds, you got to get the person who's listening to say, wow, really? Really? That's amazing. How do you do that, right? You got to get to wow. So that's my advice to every entrepreneur, especially in these times.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, especially now. There's just such an overload of information on every spectrum that highly applies. Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise and experience. Really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Great
Thank you.
fun. I wish you and all of your listeners, the greatest success. And if anybody wants to know how to find me, you can find me pretty easily if you go to the Garage website, and on Twitter and every place else as well. So
Perfect. Well, for
okay.
people who haven't already found you yet and know the way, we'll also put a link down in the description to your website and your social media. Thanks again,
Great.
Bill.